In three, two, one. What's going on, folks? Welcome to 34 Questions. I'm your host, 34. Tonight, I'm joined by a very special guest. Daus Magbual is in the building. How you doing tonight,
Chilling, man, chilling. It's been quite a year for me,
Rod? For sure.
So right now it's just like I feel like my body is kind of shutting down, but I got a lot of responsibilities I still need to, you know,
No, I got you.
meet, you know what I'm saying?
For sure.
Yeah.
I mean, it's December. Perfect time. Like, if you don't mind me asking, what was your biggest highlight of the year for yourself?
Oh man, there's a lot, man. A lot of things to be blessed about. I was a mayor for Daly City for 2022. And then I was also running for re-election for a council member. I was also tenure track full-time ethnic studies professor at Skyline College. So all those things were happening like half year of campaigning, being mayor, and also trying to, do the whole academic grind, you know what I'm saying?
Man, you have your plate full, or you kept it full all year long.
And then that's on top of being a father and a husband and also running a nonprofit as well. So it was totally
checking off all the boxes, man. Checking off all the boxes. Somebody I'm trying to get to, man. As far as the level you're at, maybe one day. But as for now, I'm just hosting this podcast, doing my day job. Well, I'm glad to hear that you had a great year. It sounds like, and hopefully more energy to you in 23 upcoming. For the folks. Oh, sorry about that.
okay.
But for the folks out there who are unfamiliar with the flow of the show, maybe Rod, this is new to you too. Just let me break it down one time. But we're going to start off with some warm-up questions, and then we'll jump into an icebreaker. After that, we'll turn to the Wheel of Fate, and then we'll do a little mantra right before we get to the closeout. Sound good to you, Rod?
Sounds good, man. Ready for it.
For sure. But my very first question, regardless of the warm-up, is going to be, how have you been? You've been doing well. You've been doing great. How you been lately, man?
Oof. I've been all right, man. I'm living, a lot of times you get in your own head, but then sometimes that's what the brain tries to tell you what to do because, it's trying to make you survive, and all the anxiety, all the stress, but then all at the same time, wherever there's a way of feeling a certain way, you're feeling that way because there's a functional opposite of things. So if there's anxiety and depression, there's also joy and happiness and blessings. So that's where I've been at right now.
For sure, man.
Yeah.
And you happen to have any piece of advice maybe for someone who's probably going through a similar thing? How do you keep yourself balanced or, in a good mood?
Well, I want to shout out one of my mentors, Dr. Alison Tintianco Cubales. She's a person that coined this term called Pinaism, which is Filipino feminism. And she's like one of the, ethnic studies, like she would hate that I call her this, but an expert in ethnic studies. But she would always say that purpose, you got to be anchored in purpose. A lot of people say that you got to have the passion for that. But sometimes passion kind of gets overwhelming. But you always got to remind yourself, what is like your purpose? What do you envision? I always told my students, like, I don't precisely know where I'm going to go, but I accurately know where I'm going.
I got you.
Yeah.
That's a good one. I'm going to have to keep that in mind. And honestly, man, doing anything, following any dreams, you're going to have a bunch of ups and downs. And I got to remember to stay connected to my purpose for sure. I think without even me realizing what that statement was, I think that's what I've been trying to do or focus on since I started doing this show. Glad to hear that you're making it through, man. All right, we're gonna move on to the warm up.
Okay.
So,
You're warm.
Yeah, you know it, man. So my first question for you in the warm up is, what would you like the audience to know about you?
Ooh, man, I love this question. This is like a legacy question. I think that what I want folks to know is that I am a extension of my ancestors. A lot of times we had that saying, like, I'm like my ancestors' wildest dreams. Sometimes I always feel like I'm also um, I bear the responsibility of my ancestors. I know the history of my family. I know the history of my people. And also, to quote one of my good friends who is an ancestor, is Dr. Daus Magbual, and she was a Filipino American professor. And when we're talking about ethnic studies, she always had these 3 questions about ethnic studies, that when you teach ethnic studies, you got to remember where your people come from. What is the story about your people? What is the story about your community? And then how do you take all those stories and take on the responsibilities to have those legacies live on? So when we talk about like what I want my audience to know, I want them to know that I am a leader, I'm a father, I'm a husband, I'm a son, I'm a professor, I'm a politician, I'm an organizer. But then I do all those things not for fame, but it's related to my purpose, but it's also related to, what are you, based on those responsibilities of what my ancestors have provided me, what am I taking those to become the responsibility and bearer of those narratives and pass it on to my successors. And so that's what I want my audience to know.
I got you, man. I got you. Thank you for sharing.
Sure, man.
I gotta ask for more advice, because I'm a person who feels a little disconnected, from Filipino history. It's weird because growing up in the Bay Area, I don't know if you're familiar with PEP or.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I never experienced it. It wasn't in my school. I wasn't part of the program. And now that I'm older and I meet more Filipinos in the community, they always bring up PEP. Shout out to PEP.
Hey, I'm the executive director of PEP, man.
There you go. Yeah, you're surprising me at every turn, dog. I didn't know you were mayor for Adelia City, and now you're the executive of PEP. But yeah, so I didn't have that. I didn't have that connection. But for some reason, I still was drawn to ancestors, and what is for me, I didn't have a connection with my grandparents. It kind of stops with my parents. So I have this thing in the back of my head that keeps telling me, like, you have to reach out somehow. Where did you start, or like where can I start as somebody at my age? Trying to feel a little more connected.
Well, what started for me was like, I'm a kid in the 90s, and I was a person that came of consciousness because of like 90s hip hop. And even though I rep Daly City, I'm the mayor of Daly City, I grew up in Southern California. And a lot of my political awakening happened right after the LA riots. And listening to the music of like NWA, Public Enemy, KRS-One, a lot of those things were politicizing me, and it gave me an understanding of like my own context, because I lived in Long Beach, California, but then I also lived in the suburbs of Riverside, California, because there was hella gangs in Long Beach. And then my parents were like, yo, we need to move out of Long Beach and go to the safe haven of like Riverside, California. And at the time, it was a very, very white community. So I was like, it's very opposite of the Bay, where it was like, I could see one of myself in many others. But then when I moved, when I was a kid, right after the LA riots, I was like the only Filipino kid amongst like my whole school. And so that's where my political awakening was happening. It was the LA riots, it was hip hop. And if that music was the music for the Black experience, I was always wondering, like, does that apply to the Filipino American experience? And at the same time, my older brother, shout out to my Manong Rich, he was taking the first Filipino American history class at UC Riverside at the time. And he came home one day and he was like, yo, Rod, you got to check out this book. It's called America's in the Heart by Carlos Bolosan. And I was like, what is this? And he's like, dude, they got Ilocano in this book. I was like, get out of here. You got no Ilocano. And I was like, when was this book written? He's like, this book was written like 1930s or something. And I was like, what? And this guy was, you read in the first half, and it's about this guy that was from the Philippines back in the 1930s that went through poverty, and he had to move from the Philippines to America. And what was crazy was that I always thought that Philippine American history started with my mom coming here as a nurse. But my grandpa came here in the 1930s, and that book was reflective of my grandpa's experience. and he would tell me about all the different racist histories that he had to undergo when he was living here, when he was like 19, 20 years old. He would tell me about how he would get harassed by cops. And in Carlos Belosan, he has this one quote that's very famous from his book, and he's like, it was something like, I think I'm butchering it, but it was something to the fact like, to be Filipino in California is like being a criminal, you know, because of like the laws that were where Filipino men couldn't be caught with white women, because there was like anti-miscegenation laws where white women couldn't marry men of color. It was also at the same time where when we hear all this rhetoric about Donald Trump, and he was talking about this anti-immigrant voice, and he was talking about make America great again, he was actually referring back to those time periods, because the people that was advising him with those policies referred back to the 1930s, when they had straight exclusion of many immigrants. And that's where my political awakening happened, was that book, America's in the Heart by Carlos Belosan. It was also, my brother brought in this other book called Filipinos Have Forgotten Asian Americans. And it was a book written by one of the godfathers of Philippine American history, Fred Cordova. And I remember flipping through the pages, and there was this like freaking Bahay Kubu right in the middle of like Louisiana, and I was like, what? How did the Filipinos come here in the 1500s? Like, this is crazy. I thought my Filipino American history started when my mom came here.
Yeah.
And it was a trip to see that, you know, Filipinos contributed to American history even prior to the establishment of the United States, prior to 1776. So when I was reading all that at a young age, I think I was around like 14, 15 years old, it started all these little fragments of understanding race, racism, the absence of my own history in the curriculum book, my own racialized experience, and dealing with racism, getting bullied, getting beat up because they didn't know what a Filipino was. That really politicized me at a very young age. And like there was this thirst, there was this like desire to understand everything and anything about Filipino Americans. And this was like around like 1993, 94. And I was thinking like the hip hop and the politicization of hip hop, and then seeing all these different Filipino DJs, and like my homies were DJs, and we'd see like this, you know, Scratch Pickles and all these other cats that were passing VHS tapes with these Filipino cats on DJing. And I was like, damn, this is crazy. You know, because we didn't have a YouTube to see ourselves in the textbooks, within the teachers, or on the TV screen, or on the big screen. Or like Filipino-ness was relegated to like my mom and pop's conversation. And for them was like, just follow whatever they say in the schools. Yeah. Just follow what you say, keep your head down, don't cause a ruckus. And I was like, nah, no, you know, it's like, it was by design that we weren't learning our history. It wasn't by accident, you know? So, you know, those are the things that really politicized me. And for me, I think those books are the ones that were really, really shaped my worldview on like Filipino American experience. And, you know, you fast forward about like 30 years now we have like, you know, we talked about Allison earlier. Allison, Dr. E.G.R. David, and Dr. Kevin Nadal, they're both Filipino American psychologists. They all just came out with a Philippine X-American encyclopedia. So now they have like an encyclopedia of hella stuff. And, you know, I wrote about a Pinay organizer. Her name is Bullet X, or AKA Violeta Marasigan. You know, like things like that. Like, it's like, I felt like I was robbed of something. Like, why didn't somebody tell me this history? And I think that's the reason why I do so much stuff. Like, I don't do this for fame. Like, I'm doing this so that we're creating a generational decisions here, so that the next person that comes to the door is open for them, and they got like people that can mentor them. Because like for me, I felt like I was in a flashlight in a dark ass room, and I was finding other Filipinos with flashlights, and we came together to illuminate a space, and that was PEP. You know,
Yeah.
so yeah.
No, I got you, man. And honestly, man, you're inspiring me with all the knowledge you just shared. Definitely, I need to look into, the writings you're talking about before 1776, because that does blow my mind.
Yeah, man.
And the travels of those folks. How? My first question is how. But yeah, that's crazy that your political awakening came in back in Riverside.
Yeah, man.
So as soon as you was moved, right, you felt this shift in yourself. What was your first action after that? Was it to reach out to people, find organizations?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's just a lot of things were just how we see this little political awakening right now. People think that Black Lives Matter is a very contemporary thing, but this is part of the Black Power movement. This is those things have different legacies of different things. And for me, I think because of the LA riots, it created these different. It put a mirror to America's society back then, and as a way to address that form of structural racism, there was different programs that started to emerge. And one of the programs that emerged was in Riverside. There was this program that emerged out of the UC Riverside's Asian Pacific Student Programs. And they started this youth program called the Youth Community Outreach Program. And which is funny because the person that started this program, Dr. Grace Yu, she's actually a professor at SS State. So when I decided to get my master's and all that, she was here, and she's still in my life, years later. And that program allowed me to investigate, interrogate, and also kind of what they call decolonize, to understand what it meant to be Asian American or what it meant to be Filipino American. And because the whole purpose behind that youth community outreach program, it was called YCOP, was to connect all the different Asian American and Pacific Islander youth student communities around UC Riverside, because there was such a small number, connect them to the large number of API students at UC Riverside. How do you create this bridge and community, but also at the same time get to learn about identity? So I was going to rap sessions. I mean, that's how I met my wife, who my current wife, and she was the president of her Asian club, and then at a rival high school was my high school, Ramona High School in Riverside, and we got together with all these different Asian clubs from the Inland Empire, and we would talk about what are the issues that Asian American youth face. What is Asian American history? What is it to be Asian American? What are the and also at the same time, gangs, why are Asian Americans joining gangs? And that was one of the reasons why we left Long Beach. I had uncles and aunties that were getting arrested, going to jail. I had friends of mine that were joining gangs at such a young age, going through mental health issues. We didn't have the language back then, but at that time, they were suffering from so much trauma that there was a reason why they were self-medicating. There was a reason why they were joining gangs, because there was a lack of community that they had. They didn't have a place where they could understand and contextualize their own experiences. So they had to numb themselves from the realities. They had to join gangs because it provided a sense of community. But the problem with it was the direction and purpose of gangs, right? Because you're trying to fight for status, you're trying to fight for some sort of notoriety, and the notoriety was who's the toughest. Or if you have lack of funds, you go to criminality. So when we think about these different street organizations, it was, for me, joining that program there was nothing wrong with gangs. It was just the direction of gangs. They were just being misinformed. And that's where my political awakening was happening, was through that program, because it was through ethnic studies. It was through learning about my history. And we were all young folks learning about what it meant to be Asian American and Pacific Islander. And then on top of that, we were b-boying and we were DJing, we were tagging, some people were in car racing, they were DJing. So it gave us an identity and understanding and purpose for all this. So, that's how it all started, man.
I got you, man.
Yeah, yeah.
It sounds like an incredible story. You got to make a movie about your life one day.
I don't know who played. Probably my son. I'm like,
One day, man. One day.
I know, one day.
Sorry, we gotta move on to the second question to the warm up, which is, if I could do some kind of act to express the energy you possess, what could I do? Like, how would you like to be honored?
Can you repeat that question one more time?
If there was some kind of act that I could do to express the energy you possess, what could I do? How would you like to be honored?
Create. Create, reflect, journal, express. I think that's the act that I would tell folks, or you, or any listeners do. You know, I don't think we do enough reflecting. We do a lot of doing, but you know, just to quote the words of like Bob Marley, you know, in this bright future, you can't forget your past, right? So in order to extend forward, you know, you got to be able to like reflect, you know, with everything that we have, all the devices we have. You know, one thing that I kind of do is like I'll stop and look at all the pictures I taken on my phone. That's one way of reflecting. I do journaling. Lately, I don't know what happened this past year, but I felt like it was like the late 90s. I started writing poetry with youth, you know, and I haven't wrote poetry in like more than 20 years. And then I got involved with like some of the Daly City youth and the Daly City Poet Laureate through the Daly City Public Library Associates. And, you know, they asked me like, hey, can you publish? Can you write? Can you perform? And I was like, this is weird. I haven't done this in a minute, but I did, you know, and sometimes we got to be able to play, you know, we don't do that enough, you know? Yeah, I think that's what I would do. Create, play, reflect.
So you're mentioning that we don't do this enough as a society. Why do you think that is? Like, why don't we play? Why don't we reflect?
Well, the easiest answer would be capitalism.
I got you.
You know, because the thing is, it's like we have this expectation of output, right? Like even when we are younger, it's like, go get your education, get a job. Once you get that job, you need to get the house, you need to get this and that, you know? And so we're so linear from getting from point A to point Z that in order to get to point Z or even to the Omega, extend beyond the alphabet, we don't do enough reflecting, you know? And sometimes you just get caught up in the future tense, and that's gonna make you anxious. And sometimes you don't feel, and that's also part of capitalism and part of mental health is we're so fast forward, and I'm guilty of this too, just being so fast forward and future oriented, and you're wishing, expecting to be where you're at, or you should be, when you need to stop and just like take it slow, you know, walk, enjoy like what you have. And, you know, and then sometimes people ask me, how did you do this past year? How were you mayor? How were you? I was like, I stopped and reflect, but then it was really, really hard because there were so many expectations of myself and the community have on me. But then it's also kind of like thinking to my head, like, how many people can say they were a mayor of a town? How many people could say they were a professor with all these students? How many people could say that they had the privilege of teaching Philippine American studies? You know, and those are the small things that, you know, if you put in perspective in a drone sense of like the drone perspective, dang, it's something that I should appreciate more. I should appreciate more, you know? Yeah.
I mean, you got your lifetime to appreciate everything.
Yeah.
But no, you're right. Reflection is definitely, I think I've always done it internally. And I grew up an only child, so I feel like being in my head and, you know, reviewing the day, thinking about all these things, it comes natural. Maybe a little too much though. I think there is such a thing as too much reflection sometimes. And, you know,
and share with other folks, I would say, you know, and that's the hard part because, you know, it's like we're so scared to share ourselves with others because, you know, constantly feel like we're gonna be judged for stuff. But I think you gotta know who your real ones are.
I got you.
You know?
Got you.
Yeah.
No, I'm normally terrified, to be honest with you. The only time The only time I really can open up is actually on the podcast, and I think it's because I set it up where I'm not giving any judgment, so I'm hoping my guest doesn't give any judgment as well, and it makes me feel more free. But yeah, my friends and stuff, they always trying to get me to talk more. I don't know if you know people. You ask them to tell a story and they don't tell you the story. They just get to the end right away. I'm that guy. But for sure, man. Now we know to create and play for you. Your folks will definitely do that, and myself as well. Let's move on to the last question of the warm up, which is on a scale from 1 to 10, how well do you know yourself?
Ooh, 1 to 10. I would say about. I'm like an 8.5.
How'd you get to the 8.5?
Because I still feel like there are still some insecurities that I need to unlock, and that's that 1.5.
I got you.
I think I know myself well enough, but then there's always certain situations that you get yourself into that you never think that you can get over obstacles, but then a lot of those experiences that I have overcame allowed me to get to where I'm at today. And then the other 1.5 is always kind of like that room for improvement, or that other unlocking of it might be even lower shit.
Hey, it's wherever you feel you are right now.
Yeah. I would say I'm changing my answer now. It's like at 8.
I got you. You gotta give yourself some space. Give it some wiggle room. No, I mean, I feel you on that. I think when I first started this pod, I would always say I was at a 5 out of 10. And after a couple of years doing it, I think I've bumped myself up to maybe a 6.5, 7. I think that just comes with age. You grow more, you're more self-aware of who you are. But for you, I want to ask just a little addition, but what's your favorite thing about your personality? Where you're just like, this is who I am, I embrace it to the fullest.
Oh man. I'm gonna use this because I teach my students this stuff. And I teach my since I have the privilege to teach like Philippine history and Philippine American studies and all that stuff. I think within myself and many Filipinos, it's how we give life. And there's this word called to animate. We are animated people, and to animate is to give life. It's more than just cartoons, but everything that I do is to give life. Everything that spaces that I enter. My kids probably hate it because sometimes I go off in these lectures or I try to ask them questions so that they can figure it out for themselves, but I'm always there to just radiate life, animate.
That's wild, man. That's a Filipino thing.
I mean, because the thing is that so the question my students always ask me is like, why are Filipinos so religious? Like why are we the most hardcore Catholics? And so I go back to, and like I don't want to say I know everything because I read a lot. So this is a shout out to Katrine de Gia, and she wrote this book called Kapwa. And Kapwa is this kind of pre-colonial value of like, you are who you are based on the relationships to everything around you, right? To nature, to your ancestors, to the world, to the people, to the community. But one of the core values of it is we've always been able to animate, right? That's why Filipinos, we be like, and so in pre-colonial settings, a lot of these rituals that they would do, singing, dancing, spiritual beliefs, it was all around and surrounded by this idea of animation, to animate. So when they say like, why Filipinos are so religious, it's because we've always been about spirituality. We've always been about animating who we are. Why are Filipinos good at dancing and singing? It's because that gives life, that gives joy. In this core value of different things, it's about animation. How do you animate who you are, right? And so for me, I mean, that's a very broad stroke, but And also a shout out to my other mentor, Tita Lenny Strobel, who used to be a professor at Sonoma State, wrote this book on decolonization. And I remember I used to teach at Sonoma State University, and one of the days I went in there early and had this conversation with her, and she mentioned that as well. You know, like it's no surprise. Like I'm like, oh my God, this DJing stuff, and it's like there's no surprise to it because we've always been in a position or culture that has been animated in everything that we do.
I never tripped off it, man, but I know deep down inside for myself, like, you know, just creating stuff in general. I'm not a singer or dancer. I'm like the only Filipino that doesn't do it either.
Hey, I don't sing or dance either. I leave it up to my kids.
Yeah, I got you. But you know, just this you say animate, and in my mind it's always been creation. Like every day I feel like the need to either write something, try to record something, try to edit something. It's all about creation for me. And I work with students as well. I work at a high school in San Francisco.
All right.
And you know, coming in, I was, at least even right now, I remember my boss in my interview was asking me like, "Oh, we're looking for someone with flavor, right?" And I'm all like, "Oh, you're looking for flavor? It's good. I got you."
Right.
And so coming in, yeah, it's all about, for me, trying to, right now, since after COVID and everything, things are, I think, changing, or there's opportunity for change in the education system. But I work for after school, so for me it's all about changing the after school framework and what values or what lessons I can give the kids, or opportunities I can give the kids to just, like, I tell them, you think of after school as just right now in high school, but I'm thinking of it as like when you're done with college, what are you doing after you're done with education? Like, so those are just kind of things I'm trying to hint at. And same way, I guess with your students, I ramble sometimes, or I'll ask questions, which, you know, in one ear out the other, especially in high school. But you know, we just hope things stick. You know?
Yeah.
As we throw it on the wall. But yeah, man, damn, so enlightening. Thank you again for coming through, dog.
Of course.
All right, so we finished the warm up. Before we get to the Wheel of Fate, we're gonna do a quick icebreaker, which is a word association game. All right.
Okay.
So here we go. Jumping into the icebreaker. We're gonna put 34 seconds on the clock. You have 34 to do as many as you can. No pressure though. I think the record is 12 in 34 seconds.
Okay.
Yeah. Here we go. In 3, 2, 1. People.
Community.
Life.
Animation.
Past.
Our history.
Lost.
It's also found.
Idea.
Life.
Believe.
Your gut.
Fear.
Being safe.
Crazy.
Ideas.
Love.
Also hate.
And I'll give you one more. Happiness.
Joy.
Got you, man. Appreciate that. I'm gonna press on one, which is for fear. You said safe, or feel safe. Why did that come up in your mind?
I think sometimes people are always, it's again, I go back to like my own therapy and my own healing. Sometimes we get scared, but it's also your brain telling you how to be safe. Right? It's your survival mode. It's a thing that you kind of learn. Even when I was a little kid, growing up in a whole community of gangs, and also in the 90s, it's like you had this fear, but it's also kind of like, what are you trying to do? It's your brain also conditioned to be like, what do you got to do to keep yourself safe?
I got you.
You know.
And I want to ask you about, you know, your mayoral run.
Yeah.
Were you fearful of that? I can imagine it's a lot of pressure and everything, but you know, so you stepped in with, or you didn't stepped in with fear, but you had fear before stepping in. How were you able to kind of reframe that in your mind to just say, you know, I'm gonna do this?
I think for me, it was related to my purpose. Because the thing is, like, you know how you're talking about your principal asking you about how you gonna bring your flavor,
Yeah.
right? And I was like, yo, I'm gonna be the mayor that I wish I can observe growing up. Like, who is the hip hop mayor? Who is the mayor that can connect with young people, with elder folks? Who's the mayor that can bring topics about race and racism and converse about these different things? And I knew it was fearful. Like, if you ask my wife, she'd probably be like, damn, why are you always scared? And it was always because I was doing something that was out of the ordinary. Because I don't know what was going to happen. You know, most mayors come in, they'll give you numbers, they give you stats, they give you like budgets. And I did all that too. But then also at the same time, I want to give you perspective. I wanted to give you understanding. I also want to give you beauty, because a lot of times it's so easy to. I always tell people, like, people always ask me like, how did it feel about being mayor? I was like, man, it felt like the biggest spotlight in your face and on your back was, or it was like the brightest spotlight in your face along with the biggest target on your back. And that was a lot of fear, you know. But also at the same time, I had to ground myself. Like, shit, I was meant for this. All the stuff that I've learned in ethnic studies, all the stuff that my ancestors, my grandpa had to go through, all the things that I, like, what my family has dreamed of that are in the Philippines that can't be in the position I'm in. I'm doing this for them. I'm doing this for my kids to show that in the times of the most craziest times of during COVID, during the Trump administration, that they had parents that stood up to this. And when they grow up, and hoping, I'm hoping that they saw that they were like, you know, my dad wasn't a punk. My dad stepped up to these different things. They didn't shy away from these different things. So for me, it was always I also had this idea of like the storied being. You are who you are based on the stories that are told to you, right? And ethnic studies was those stories for me. But also at the same time, as being a story being, you're also an author of the future. What do you want to write so that the narratives that get passed on to future generations, and they would see this time period? What are they going to say about what Filipinos did during this time period? I wasn't just present tense. I was also in the mindset of like taking the past, envisioning what is in the future, but the work is in the present. You know, and that's what I was always thinking about in terms of being mayor. So when you talk about fear and also safety, but it was also grounded in purpose. And that purpose was like, the decisions wasn't being made at this present time. The decisions are going to be made for the next generations that could step up to the next step up to the next generation and see what I've done. Right. And hopefully, you know, I've been able to shed the light for the next generation, you know. So that's my whole thing. That was, you know, I think when people say like I'm colorblind, I'm like, nah, that you're being colorblind, but then now you're denying the presence and you're denying like race and acknowledging that there is racism. But also at the same time is like, you have the historical responsibility that people that look like me were not even given the privilege to be in this space. So I've wanted to honor my role as mayor. I wanted to provide this sense of hope, identity, and purpose.
I mean, I'm sure, man. You showed a lot of people the possibilities, right? You know, I don't think I knew a Filipino mayor growing up, even in the Bay.
Now we have hella. I don't want to say hella, more than before.
For sure. But yeah, you know, it's just showing a lot of the, you know, the next generation. If you want to, this is what can be achieved. And yeah, I had this one question, and I'm trying to remember it, but I think it's flown away. If it comes back to me, I'll let you know.
Oh yeah, man, let me know.
But let's jump into our main meat of the program, which is the Wheel of Fate. So I'm gonna give it a spin, And whichever number lands on, we'll go with it. And remember, if any questions too deep or too personal, feel free to pass. We have number 18, which is, what is something you're insecure about?
Oh man, this is such the Filipino thing right here. I'm scared of messing up. I'm a perfectionist,
Gotcha.
you know,
Yeah.
and I think that's kind of like, man, I gotta humanize myself. Like, we're going to make mistakes, but I think that's the thing. Is like, you know, I know the historical responsibility that I have, but then there's a lot of people that lean on me. That it almost kind of puts me in a place where I can't mess up. You know, and that's the hard thing.
For sure. And it's like,
Yeah.
you know, even when you think you're messing up, to everybody else you might not be, right? It's just,
Yeah.
oh, you're doing your thing regardless. But
Right.
I hear you, dog. As far as like just telling yourself, I could have done better, or I could have done more than just that. It's a really tough thing to overcome sometimes. So for this perfectionism, you think this is more nature or nurture for you? Like, you see it in your folks as well, or you think it's just because, you know, of how you were raised?
I think it was I was raised, but it's also kind of like, we also talk about this idea of generational trauma, right? Like, there is probably this again, when these forms of trauma never get resolved, it gets passed on from the next generation. And I'm pretty sure like it probably happened to my mom, because my mom was the hope of my family, along with my other auntie, to take my family out of poverty, you know, and that's a lot of responsibility on a young person, you know. And then my mom had these expectations of my brother and I, you know. It's like, I came here to America, what are you gonna do, you know? So it's one of those things as well. So that form of perfectionism comes from these ideas, or these kind of like the phenomenon of generational trauma. But then also at the same time, by recognizing that, it's also my hope that I can address it and become a form of generational healing as well.
I feel you, man.
Yeah.
And do you still see, I guess, you know, working with students, that perfectionism still be super relevant in our culture?
Oh yeah, most definitely, especially amongst immigrant students, where it's like, you know, they know that their parents sacrificed so much for them to come to America, and they have this idea of the American dream that I need to make it in America. And I see it with a lot of my students. Shoot, I even see it like even with a lot of the folks that I work with, you know. And it's like a double-edged sword. It's like, it's got me this far, but also at what detriment?
I hear you.
You know, so
I think that's something that maybe it has been talked about, maybe there's already research on it, but for children of immigrants coming on, I know I'm familiar with that pressure, and I don't think it's put on me by my parents, but just, you know, as we get older, we realize, like, I don't know how old were your parents when they immigrated over here, but my folks, they were in early 20s. So like, just the thought of me right now uprooting myself from America and moving somewhere else to be like, all right, this is where I'm gonna be, away from everybody, is wild. It is extremely wild.
Yeah.
So to do that in the 80s and the 90s and even before that, it's like you basically saying peace to everyone you know and just like hoping for the best, which is crazy adventure.
And that's crazy, because like my grandpa did that too. You know, it's like my grandpa came here as a 19-year-old kid, you know, with a form of adventure, as a form to do something better for themselves, because they came from very impoverished backgrounds, you know. And then he comes back to the Philippines, has my mom, you know. So these different patterns, we don't really think about it, but what does it do to these future generations of like escaping poverty? And, you know, like, I'm at a point where I'm privileged to have a roof over my head, and I don't have to question about the next meal, and I do have jobs that I love. And the thing is like that, those things of perfection, and it's that idea of the fear thing, right? You're like, I don't want to be it's this kind of like fear of like going hungry, and that's kind of like what my dad and my mom pushed. It's like I got to a point where like my dad would always tell me like, when I was like boy, it was a luxury to eat meat. I only ate, fish and kamates and rice, like rice and tomatoes and, bogong, and that's all we had. And I'm like, holy smokes. So for them, their idea of fear is like, it pushed them to be where they're at today, but also at what detriment,
Yeah.
And so we have to really look at ourselves at a society level, like, is this sustainable? Especially with like so many folks that are going through so much mental health stuff nowadays, and being anxious and depressed, or even have like suicide ideation, and I see that with my students, and it's just like, it's hard, but I also have to kind of give them a context about maybe this is probably why you may feel like this, so.
Mm-hmm. Were you ever had a chance to connect with your grandfather, like the one that was immigrated here early?
Yeah, I did, but it's so crazy because there was also a generation gap as well. Because so the connection was like my grandparents lived with me, but because of like language and I guess fear of like, because he was old.
I got you.
I spoke to him, and it's not like he was a person that come up to me and like, hey, I got something to say to you. It was always me asking a question. So for example, right, like that book by Fred Cordova, the Filipinos, the Lost Asian Americans, or the Forgotten Asian Americans. I remember having that book on the table, and then my grandpa picking up that book, and he was shuffling through that book, and he was like, oh, I was there. I experienced that. Watsonville riots, I was there. I was like, nah, you're lying, grandpa. And it's crazy because at that same time, I was his age when I was reading that book. I was like 19 years old reading that book, and my grandpa was 19 when he came to America.
Wow.
So, it's just one of those things. It's like my grandpa had to come here, and my mom came here, and then also I'm doing what I'm doing now. It's kind of like, it didn't start with me. It was something that was born generations ago.
I got you. And are you bilingual, or can you speak fluent?
Kind of, a little bit. I understand more Ilocano than I do Tagalog.
For sure. I'm more Tagalog, but what saddens me a lot, man, is the divide. I think that people have told me about, between Filipinos in the motherland versus Filipino Americans. Is there, you have any like strategy for us to kind of bridge that gap, or at least, not, I feel like there's a lot of just talking on both sides, and I'm just like, I don't feel that way. I don't want us to be separated or like feel like we're different people. So yeah.
Right. I think it's really about understanding our histories, honestly. Like, why have millions of Filipinos left the Philippines? Like I've had it where, so like one of the questions that my students ask me is like, I don't know why these Filipino Americans are so embarrassed to speak their language. And I was like, have you ever asked them? Because for me, I was able to, when I was like a kid, I was able to understand and speak like my broken Tagalog or broken Ilocano and do English. But then it was my experience through a parent-teacher meeting, and my teacher was telling my parents like, hey, you know what? You should stop talking to your child in your native language because he has a stutter. And so what does that do? So the thing is that for these Filipino immigrant kids, I tell them that it's not because they're embarrassed, it's probably also pressures of assimilation. And so the thing is like the context needs to be understood, the history needs to be understood, because a lot of times we don't understand why people came from the Philippines to America or North America. And why do we put America in such a pedestal? You know, it's also this understanding of, and for my students, it's crazy because when we learn about this idea about the Filipino-American War, and Filipino-American War was like a war of genocide on the Philippines. And depending on which historian you talk to, they say about 200,000, 500,000. Some people would say over 1 million Filipinos have passed away from that war. And people don't even know it was a war. People think of it as an insurrection. And what's crazy is that because of that magnitude of such killing of the Filipino, the Americans came into the Philippines and created their own American education system there. So what do you do with the survivors of war? You re-educate them, right? So you re-educate them so that they can understand that America is, you know, the roads paved with gold,
American dream,
they're saviors, American dream. And so I think on both sides of the ocean, we have to really have this critical understanding. But if our education systems are not going to support that, a lot of it has to be on us, because it was by design for us not to know our histories.
Got you.
Yeah.
I think that's a good place to start. Would you ever run for office out there?
I probably would lose because I can't even speak my own language.
Maybe there's one city that's a little open-minded. Who knows, man? It's all in for progress, right? But I got you. I got you. And I remember the question I was going to ask you earlier, but it was was being in office as bad as you thought it was going to be, or like, as you know, your fears come up, or was it different than what you thought?
Way different. Like when I got elected in 2018, it was, and then 2019 was cool, and then 2020 rolled through. I think people that got elected in 2018 didn't realize what they got themselves into when COVID hit. Anybody that was a politician that ran in 2018 that got in there, man, we're still battling it till this day.
Yeah, man.
And for people that wanted to get reelected, like, it's either you were crazy or you had this deep passion and purpose to run again because you felt like you were robbed.
Yeah, I got you.
And that was the case with me. I felt like, like a lot of the ideas that I wanted, let's do it now, and yeah.
I got you. All right, man, we made it pretty much. We have about 8 minutes left in the pod. I want to be respectful for your time too. I want to thank you again for coming through. I hope this has been fun for you. It's been very informative and chill for me. But before we get to the closeout questions, we're going to do this one exercise called the 34th mantra. Basically, it's going to be you talking to you. So you'll have a clip for yourself, but I want you to finish the statements: I am, I can, I will. So it's I am blank, I can blank, I will blank. Whenever you're ready, go for it.
All right. I would say I am Pinoy. I can change the world, and I will transform generations ahead of me.
Got you. If you ever forget, now you got this little soundbite of yourself telling yourself exactly what you're gonna do.
Most definitely, man. Yeah.
All right, man. Let's move on to the closeout questions, which this first one is gonna be from my previous guest. I want to shout out to Dennis the Guru. His question for you is: what drives you to be your best every day?
Ooh. I don't know why Kobe Bryant just came to my head right now. My favorite basketball player, but he always had that one commercial. He's like,
I think I know what you're talking about. Go ahead.
Same animal but different beast. I think what drives me every day is it's really anchored in my purpose. It's my purpose to come together my vision of the future that I want the world to become, the responsibility of the past and what struggles and survival stories that my ancestors have emboldened upon me. But it's also like, how do we chip away to making that vision come to fruition? And that's why the work that I do, that's the reason why I do so many different jobs, different type of work. Is that it's historical. It's a historical responsibility for me.
Gotcha, man. I don't doubt that you can carry the weight, man. But I just hope, you have those support systems to help you along the way for sure.
Most definitely, man. Yeah.
And my second to last question for you is, what would you like to ask the next guest on 34 Questions?
What brings you joy?
Good.
Yeah.
I'm just writing it down real quick. What brings you joy?
No problem, man. Because everybody's like, I want to be happy. But happy is just a moment, but joy is like a longer time period.
Yeah, man. I like to answer this last question as well. So thinking about what brings me joy is, I think I'm at my most high level of joy when I feel the most balanced, where I feel like, I like to work hard, but I also like to, play hard as well. But for me to play hard, then if I know that I didn't put the work in, it feels like I didn't earn it. And that's very subjective, right? Like someone could tell me, oh, you've done a lot of work today, versus myself telling, like me saying I did a lot of work and I should be able to rest. And I think that's my inner battle as far as, trying to be easier on myself. I really don't know. I have friends and family who tell me you need to be easier on yourself. And I think that there's a whole bunch of other people who would tell me I need to be harder on myself. So, internally, I'm just like, I don't know. I'm just trying to do what's best for me. But yeah, so I think balance at the end of the day for me is the thing that brings me most joy.
Yeah, that's the key, man.
I'll try.
Balance, bro.
Yeah. All right, boss. The last question for you, the question that ties everything together. But 100, 200, 300 years from now, your descendants are watching this video. What would you like to tell them?
Ooh. Damn, that's a good ass question, man. That's a really good question. You said a question or just a statement?
Could be either one, man. Like it's just them watching this. They're like, oh, this is my ancestor right here, and they're just getting to know you after this episode. So it could relate to what you said before, maybe some words of wisdom, before the episode ends for them.
I think what I would tell them, I would tell them I love them. I love you, and I would say that. I would just say I love you, and whatever they take in with that, they could take it and accept it for what it is. Because sometimes I would love to hear what my ancestors would tell me, and seeing what I've done over the 40 plus years I've been on this planet. I hope I did them proud, so that's the same thing too. I would say I love them and I hope I've done you proud.
I hear you, man. I hear you. Any last things you'd like to add before we head out of here?
No, I just want to say thank you to you. Everybody be safe with all the families. We're getting into holiday season, and tomorrow is never a given. So illuminate, animate, give life, and live your every day like it's your last.
Here, man. I want to thank you again, Rod, for stopping by. I want to thank all the folks out there as well, whoever tuned in. If you're listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or YouTube, appreciate your time as well. Remember to reach out, reach forward. As always, much love, and we'll catch you guys next time on 34 Questions. Peace. And it fades out from there. Yeah, man. What was that experience like for you? How did it feel going through 34 questions?
I liked it, man. I think it's we talked about reflection, and I don't think we do enough reflection. And when we do the type of work that we do, we're always fast forward and forward thinking. Yeah, we never stop and break and easy back it up and just see what you've accomplished and where you're going. And I think that's what allowed me to, and also 2022, as all the different responsibilities I've gone through, I never had a chance to really stop and think about what happened, because 2022 went by so quick,
Dude.
so fast. So
For sure.
yeah, I mean, kind of just chill. Yeah.
Right on, man.